Now I'm going to add a few things to the locomotive. It's easier to do this at this point before we add the bogie base on. So the first thing I'm going to do is add some centers to the wheel and some wedges. And whenever I'm working on the locomotive like this, you can see maybe behind here I've got a washcloth just to protect the other side. So to start with on the wheels, here are my little 8 half-inch circles that I reserved when I was working on the ends of the pipes. Now if you've lost these, you can just make some more, because we have to have a total of 16 anyway. So I've reserved those 8, and I'm going to cut 4 more from, in the cutting guide there is a piece of lightweight chipboard specified that is 3/4 inch by 5 inches. It's called the wheel centers, and I'm just going to punch 4 more so that I'll have a total of 12 to start with. So I backed this with some stick it before I did it, just like these other original ones have. So I'll do 4 more here. So I've cut those 4 out, and now on the remaining piece of this chipboard, I'm going to take my antique bronze paint and just paint that. And maybe it'll take like 2 thin layers to get a decent coat of paint, but I'll just set that aside to dry. And then we can work on the little wedges that we're going to have. This is a 2-inch circle cut from medium weight chipboard. I cut this circle using the medium sized die on the Tim Holtz circle dies. It's 2 inches. I'm just going to attach it to my work surface, centered in 2 inches and with the 45-degree angle running through the center. And then I'll draw a line through the middle in both directions, and then I'll also draw on that 45-degree angle, and then I can use the intersection of the squares on my grid to draw the 45 in the other direction. So now I've subdivided that into 8 wedges, and then I'm going to take my circle template and line up the 1/2-inch circle in the center and just draw around that. I'm just going to color it in so that I know that I'm going to cut that out. So now I'm going to cut this into 8 wedges and then remove the black part on each one, so that instead of having a point, it'll have kind of a curved end to it. So I'll go ahead and do that cutting. So here are all of my wedges, and I've cut the little points off, and now I'm just going to glue them together in sets of 2. And I should say I did take a moment and put a second thin layer of paint on my little piece of lightweight chipboard over there. So I'll get these put together in sets of 2 and then come back. So now I'm just going to take my black Copic marker and darken the tops and all the sides of all 4 of these. And then I'll also punch 4 more holes in my little piece of lightweight chipboard, and then I'll be back. And now I'm going to layer the little 1/2-inch circles in groups of 4 with the painted side on the outside. And then I'm going to punch a hole with my 1/8-inch hole punch in the center. And if you think that's too tricky to do, you could use an awl. And if you're going to use an awl, you probably would have to do it in sets of 2 and then put them together. So I found the best way for me to get a hole in the center was I layered 4 of them up. Then I used my awl to mark a center point there, and then I could see that center point through the hole in my crocodile, and that's how I was able to get my circles in the center, and they're pretty well centered. And then I took a moment and blackened the edges with my Copic marker, and now I want to add a brad in the center. And these, I would say, are about 1/4 of an inch. Maybe they're just a hair over 1/4 of an inch, you know, whatever you have that you like. And so I'm just going to fit that down through that center there, and then use some pliers to get that down in there. Then I'll spread the, there's some stick it backing on here. Get that off. There we go. Now I can spread these brad legs. Go ahead and give that a squash so it's sitting nice and flat there. There we go. And then you can just use your Tim Holtz scissors to cut off the ends of these brad legs that stick out. Now just be careful, put your finger on them so that they won't go flying all over the place, and then make sure they get into the trash because they will be sharp. So I'll just do that for each of the pieces, and then I'll be back. So we'll start out by using some Glossy Accents or diamond glaze to put these little centers in the center. And make sure you get them in the center. We did mark center, but you know, look at them and make sure they get in the center. And I'm only going to work on one side of this locomotive at a time, and I'll make sure that my Glossy Accents has set up before I go on to the next point. Now the wedges are going to go in at an angle, and to determine what that angle is, we'll take one of the other wedges and put it coming straight down from that central piece. And then we can put some glue on the back of the wedge we're going to put in, and put that up right next to that first one and up against that central hub. And clean up any glue you have. So, and obviously when you get to the last one, you won't have a wedge to use as a template, so just go ahead and trace one and cut it out of cardstock to use for your placement on your fourth wheel. So we'll just let these set up, and then after this side is set up, I'll go ahead and repeat that on the other side. When we put the wedges on the other side, we want them to be symmetrical with the first side, and that means that they should point towards the back this way. So remember when we had them on the other side, see how they're going towards the back? We want them going to the back on this side as well. So I'll still follow that same procedure to put the little wedge in, and use that as a placement guide to put the second one in. And then here I think you see I've cut a little template so that when I go to do my last one, I can use that template for a placement guide. To add the railings, we need to have some brackets. And in the cutting guide it says to cut a square that is a minimum of 4 5/8 by 4 5/8. And then cut a circle using, it's a 3-inch circle using that largest die on the Tim Holtz die. And then bring this circle so that it is centered on your grid. And once you have it centered, just go ahead and put it down with some temporary adhesive. Now we want to take our compass, and you can see when I centered it I have a center point here, and I'm going to open my compass to a radius of 2 1/8. So 2 1/8, and then I'll put the center point of the compass on that center mark on my grid and draw a circle around here. And then I want a second circle, and it is 1 7/8, 1 7/8. So it'll end up being a 1/4 inch smaller than the first circle. And we'll go ahead and draw that around. Okay. So now, the reason we're starting with this circle is because when the brackets get attached to the boiler, it's a curved surface. So if we start with this curve, we'll have more success when we're gluing. And so I want to cut out 16 brackets from this piece, and the way I'm going to do it is to first draw a center line, and then I'm going to mark 3/16 on either side of that center line. So 3/16 on either side of center line. And that's going to give us a piece that is 3/8 inch wide. We'll use this center line to punch a hole, but our actual piece is 3/8 and then goes to this outside curve. So now, without moving my template, I'm going to do the same thing going across this way. Mark that center line and then 3/16 on either side. Now, we can do another set that goes from on the diagonals, so I'll just mark a center line again. And then I want to draw another set going this way, but my tape is kind of in the way, so I'm going to put some other tapes on these corners first before I move these tapes. And then I can do the center diagonal going this way. So now we have 8, but we need 16. So let's pick this up. And what I'm going to do is just use my eye and make a mark in between 2 sets one way and 2 sets on kind of the opposite side. And then do the same thing on the other ones. So now I've got all of those areas split. And then I'll just take my cardboard, chipboard, and line up a set of those tick marks I just made, put down my tape, and now I can do the same thing over again, make my center line and 3/16 on either side. I can go just connecting my center lines across until eventually I get 16 of these little brackets marked out, going all the way around. Now to cut these out, the easiest way is to cut the outside circle first, and so I'm just going to cut close to it, just like you would cut any other circle by hand first. And then once I've roughly cut that circle, I'll go ahead and cut on that outside line. And now to cut out the individual brackets, I think I'll just use my scissors and come right along that line. Or of course you could use your craft knife. So I'll get all 16 of my little pieces cut out and then I'll be back. So now we're going to glue 6 sets of these together in groups of 2, so then we'll have 4 little singles left over behind. And there's a real subtle difference between the inside curve and the outside curve, but if you look carefully you'll see that. So go ahead and just glue these up in sets of 2. And then in all 6 doubles and 2 of the singles, I'm going to punch a 1/8 inch hole with my Crop-A-Dile at the intersection of those lines. So what I did to punch these holes was I punched one, and then I set my Crop-A-Dile to the distance from the bottom to that hole. So, you know, I had it in here, and then I set the little distance gauge here. And that way I know that all of them are the same distance from that inside curve to the hole. So now these 2 that have holes get glued to the front of the two that don't have holes, and I'm just avoiding putting any glue near that hole. And now I'm going to color all of these black with my Copic marker. So I've decided that I want these little brackets to be a little more rounded off. I think you can see here on the left, this one is more rounded than this one is on the right. So the way I did that was I just took my circle template, and I'm finding a circle that's about the right size for this piece. And I just want to draw myself a little guideline that's about 1/8 of an inch up from the hole. And then with some sharp scissors, I can carefully cut that. And then of course if you have a little rough edge, I have a little rough right there at the end. I'm going to take my emery board to it, and then I'll just re-blacken that. And I think that gives it a little nicer profile at the top. So here's my railing that's dry, and I've threaded 3 of the little guys on here. They can turn very easily. I hope you can see that. So if yours don't, you don't want to force them on here, you could ruin the paint job. So just use your file if you need to make those holes a little bigger. So how I'm going to put this on is one of these guys is going to go right up against the cab, and it will sit on top of a piece of trim, and we'll talk about dealing with that in a second. And then these next 2 floaters, I'm going to put them right on the insides of these 2 pieces of trim. Hopefully you can see that. And then this last one, and this is the one that has only has a hole on the inside, I'm going to put that on the inside of this piece of trim. Now, so I need to check my length here. and you can take it down in little bits. I can see that I'm going to have to take off it should come, I would say, about a 1/16 of an inch past the trim line. So I'm going to cut mine off that length, and then I'm installing mine so that it is sitting about an inch up from the platform. See if I can hold this here like this, so that the railing itself is about an inch. There's an inch, this is a 1-inch ruler that I have here. There's an inch underneath it. And so depending on where this joint occurs back here for this last little guy, you'll probably need to trim a little bit off the bottom just because there's some thickness to the trim. And then you may need to cut a little notch around one of the pearls if you've used a pearl on your trim. So I'm going to get my bottom of this piece in the back cut off. I'm going to cut the end off here, and then I'll be back. So I have my dowel cut to the right length now. It really needed to be about a 1/16 inch short of this piece of trim, and then I needed to slice it off just a tad more, but it's always better to cut it too long and then have to trim a little bit off. And I've also cut just a little notch and a tiny bit off this back one. Maybe you can see there's a little notch, maybe not, but just so it'll fit around that last pearl. So I'm going to do this in a couple of stages. I'm going to take off the end one for now, but I'm going to leave these two floaters on there. And then I'm going to put some glue around the end. Just on the very end. So this last one can come in place. It should sit flush with that end. And then I'll use my ruler and get that, I'm only going to glue in the one that's going against the cab for right now. So I'm using my ruler. Oops, my hand's in the way, sorry about that. So I have my ruler here to help me space, my 1-inch ruler to help me space that up. I'm just going to glue this back one against the cab, and then I'll let that thoroughly dry. And this is a lot easier to do if you have, at this point, to have the locomotive standing straight up. I couldn't show you very well if it was doing that. So I'll go ahead and get that attached. So now that this back one is set up, I'll use my ruler and I'll put these two floaters in the middle. I'm just going to swing them up a little bit out of the way, up like so their ends are facing up, put some glue on them and swing them back down, and make sure that the railing is staying straight by using my 1-inch ruler, and let those set up for a few minutes. So I cut myself a little 1-inch piece of medium weight chipboard, and it's perfect to use as a little spacer. My little ruler is really just too long to be worked with. So this is just a little piece of 1-inch tall medium weight chipboard, and it's just holding it there in place, and I'm letting that set up and cure. And while I was waiting for the glue to set up on these two floaters, I added one of my little half pearls to the front pieces, and now I can just use some glue on the inside of the hole, and then of course down here on this edge to install that front piece. So there's this railing installed, and I'll go ahead and repeat that process on the other side. And then one last little thing is to put another one of the 1/2-inch plugs up here on top of the sand dome. I had debated about what color it should be, and that's why I didn't put it in place until now, but I've decided that black is good, and I've just used my Copic marker to ink it up, and then I'll just center that with a little bit of white glue.